Okay, looks like my voice isn't on. Let's fix that. There we go. Okay. Welcome, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to my Twitch stream. My name is Kris. This is Wizard Way, and we will be reading the Silmarillion every Saturday from here on out. This will be my first time reading aloud, so please bear with me. But we're going to have some fun. I do have some fun voice filters that I will be using throughout the stream whenever I hit some dialogue. I will try to be planning that out ahead of time so that it'll go as smoothly as possible. You might see my kitties on the side here because my webcam is at an angle that you can actually see them. So say hi to my cats. That's Gray and Alana. Welcome, everybody. So anybody who is still over on my TikTok channel, please head up to my Twitch. You will be able to have a better experience while I read. But I am simul-streaming just for ease, so if everyone is only on their phone and doesn't have access to Twitch, you can do either one. But let's get started, shall we? Hydrate. Thank you. Thank you, Monday Night. I will be trying to stay hydrated. It'll be important as I read. Alright, so what we're going to be doing is testing out the various audio levels. Please let me know how my voice sounds. I know it's going to sound fine over on TikTok, but here on the Twitch stream, I definitely need a little feedback. So please let me know. Let me know how my voice sounds. And I know there is background music as well. I probably need to turn that down a bit, huh? Let's turn that down a bit. Okay. Alright, we want the background music to be pretty low. We don't want it to be a distraction, so, sounds good? Good stuff. Alright, let's get started. So, we are going to be reading from the Silmarillion today, and just in case you guys have not seen this particular version of the book, this is the 60th anniversary, I believe. I got lucky. There were only 4,000 of these printed in the first printing worldwide, so this is a really nice edition, and the reason I'm reading from this particular one is it is an illustrated version, and I will be able to, on the Twitch stream, I will be able to share all of the beautiful illustrations with you as we go along. I can do that because I have an overhead cam as well. So let's test that out as well. Again, just trying to test everything out before we get started. So, let me see. Alright, so gonna test this out over on the Twitch stream. Okay, so that should work. You guys should be able to see the Silmarillion here on my desktop and me up in the corner. Please let me know if everything looks good. Hey, New Beta, thank you for heading over to Twitch. Welcome to my chat. And welcome to my very colorful layout. Can you tell I'm queer? Am I projecting? Maybe a little. But this is a beautiful copy of the Silmarillion. The cover is illustrated all the way around with the burning of the ships at Alcolonde. Or no, at Losgar. The burning of the ships at Losgar. Oh my gosh. Brain fart. I'm like, I know better. Beautiful illustrations by Ted Nasmith. So, cannot wait, cannot wait. And on the cover, we do have an inlay that is Maglor, spoiler alert, throwing the Silmaril into the ocean. But this way, you guys will be able to see illustrations as we move through. So, that is the goal. For you guys to get as good of a view of everything as possible while we have fun reading through the Silm. So whenever we hit an illustration, I will hit this scene and let you guys actually see the book. And I can always zoom in and such too, if necessary. I do know that my overhead cam doesn't have the best resolution in the world, so apologies there, but I am trying. One of these days I will upgrade. Unfortunately, Elgato's Epoch Cam doesn't work on Android phones, it only works on iPhones, and I don't have an iPhone. So we're doing what we can. But that'll be the start of the Quintus Silmarillion. And for now, we are going to be starting at the very beginning, which means beginning with the foreword. Hey, welcome everybody. Welcome over on my TikTok channel. I am streaming on Twitch, where you guys will be able to see any illustrations as we read through the Silmarillion. Welcome everyone. Head over to Twitch if you're able to. It'll be a much better experience for you. All right, we're gonna switch scenes back to just the chatting one. I don't think we're going to have any major illustrations today. So we will start with the reading. Okay, just making sure that my audio's there. It is good to go. All right, so we'll do a quick little introduction and then we will get started. Hey everybody on YouTube, my name is Kris, this is Wizard Way, and we are going to be reading the Silmarillion today. I am doing a full read-through. Today is a bit of a test stream, just so you guys can get a bit of an idea what the Silmarillion is about from Tolkien's words himself. The Silmarillion was published after J.R.R. Tolkien passed away. It is a posthumous publication. It was compiled by his son, Christopher, and this is all of the background stuff for the history of Middle-earth prior to The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. So most of the Silmarillion takes place long, long before that, between 3 and like 12,000 years before that. We will begin with the foreword as well as the preface, and then we will move on to a letter by J.R.R. Tolkien giving a bit of background to the book. So consider this an introduction to the Silmarillion, and then the next stream we will start on the actual Ainu Lindale, which is the creation myth that Tolkien wrote for his world. So let's get started. As we go along, I will be switching to a different view whenever there are illustrations, so you guys will be able to see those. But for today, there isn't going to be much of that. But let's get started. Just as a 411, there are about 50 illustrations in the entire book, so there's lots of beautiful stuff I'll be able to share. I'm super excited about it. All right, so we are going to start reading the Silmarillion. We're going to start with the foreword. Let me take a quick drink and we'll get going. All right, stay hydrated, folks. Okay, let's get started. I'm so excited. I'm a little nervous. First read through. At least reading aloud, I mean. All right, foreword. The Silmarillion, now published 4 years after the death of its author, is an account of the Elder Days, or the First Age of the world. In The Lord of the Rings were narrated the great events at the end of the Third Age, but the tales of the Silmarillion are legends deriving from a much deeper past, when Morgoth, the first Dark Lord, dwelt in Middle-earth, and the High Elves made war upon him for the recovery of the Silmarils. And this is actually kind of a fun detail here, but almost that exact wording is what is written in Elvish on the title page. So if you look on the title page of most copies of the Silmarillion, that is almost verbatim what it says in Elvish on that front page. Just a little detail. All right, continuing. Not only, however, does the Silmarillion relate the events of a far earlier time than those of The Lord of the Rings, it is also, in all the essentials of its conception, far the earlier work. Indeed, although it was not then called the Silmarillion, it was already in being half a century ago, which is pretty impressive. And in battered notebooks extending back to 1917, can still be read in the earliest versions, often hastily penciled, of the central stories of the mythology. But it was never published, though some indication of its content could be gleaned from The Lord of the Rings, and throughout my father's long life he never abandoned it, nor ceased even in his last years to work on it. In all that time, the Silmarillion, considered simply as a large narrative structure, underwent relatively little radical change. It became long ago a fixed tradition and background to later writings. But it was far indeed from being a fixed text, and did not remain unchanged even in certain fundamental ideas concerning the nature of the world it portrays. While the same legends came to be retold in longer and shorter forms, and in different styles. As the years passed, the changes and variants, both in detail and in larger perspectives, became so complex, so pervasive, and so many-layered that a final and definitive version seemed unattainable. Moreover, the old legends, old now not only in their derivation from the remote First Age, but also in terms of my father's life, became the vehicle and depository of his profoundest reflections. In his later writing, mythology and poetry sank down behind his theological and philosophical preoccupations, from which arose incompatibilities of tone. So, aka, as he went along, Tolkien's mind and his thoughts concerning the world, his worldview itself, changed over time, and because of that, the tone of the Silmarillion changed, as well as his different drafts of the same stories. So that's just my own commentary there. On my father's death, it fell to me to try to bring the work into publishable form. It became clear to me that to attempt to It became clear to me that to attempt to present within the covers of a single book the diversity of the materials, to show the Silmarillion as in truth a continuing and evolving creation extending over more than half a century, would in fact lead only to confusion and the submerging of what is essential. So, aka, if we put it all together, would it even be cohesive? Would it be comprehensible? I set myself, therefore, to work out a single text, selecting and arranging in such a way as seemed to me to produce the most coherent, hey, I just used that word, and internally self-consistent narrative. In this work, the concluding chapters, from the death of Turin Turambar, introduced peculiar difficulties, in that they had remained unchanged for many years, and were in some respects in serious disharmony with more developed conceptions of other parts of the book. A complete consistency, either within the compass of the Silmarillion itself, or between the Silmarillion and other published writings of my father's, is not to be looked for. Don't take it too seriously, is what he's saying. Don't expect everything to line up properly. Alright. So don't look for that. And could only be achieved, if at all, at heavy and needless cost. Moreover, my father came to conceive the Silmarillion as a compilation, a compendious narrative, made long afterwards from sources of great diversity, poems and annals and oral tales, that had survived in age-long tradition. And this conception has indeed its parallel in the actual history of the book, for a great deal of earlier prose and poetry does underlie it, and it is to some extent a compendium in fact and not only in theory. To this may be ascribed the varying speed of the narrative and fullness of detail in different parts, the contrast, for example, of the precise recollections of place and motive in the legend of Turin Turambar beside the high and remote account of the end of the First Age, when Thangorodrim was broken and Morgoth overthrown, and also some differences of tone and portrayal, some obscurities, and here and there, some lack of cohesion. So, aka, there are problems with the text, and he's just acknowledging this fact, and this is Christopher Tolkien who wrote the foreword, if that wasn't clear already. Okay, In the case of the Valaquenta, for example, we have to assume that while it contains much that must go back to the earliest days of the Eldar and Valinor, it was remodeled in later times, and thus explain its continual shifting of tense and viewpoint, so that the divine powers seem now present and active in the world, now remote, a vanished order known only to memory. So there are inconsistencies. The book, though entitled as it must be, the Silmarillion, contains not only the Quenta Silmarillion, or Silmarillion proper, but also 4 other short works. The Ainulindale and Valaquenta, which are given at the beginning, are indeed closely associated with the Silmarillion. The Akalabeth and Of the Rings of Power, which appear at the end, are, it must be emphasized, wholly separate and independent. They are included according to my father's explicit intention, and by their inclusion the entire history is set forth from the music of the Ainur, which the world began, to the passing of the ring-bearers from the havens of Mithlond at the end of the Third Age, after the Lord of the Rings. The number of names that occur in the book is very large, and I have provided a full index, but the number of persons, elves and men, who play an important part in the narrative of the First Age is very much smaller, and all of these will be found in the genealogical tables. In addition, I have provided a table setting out the rather complex naming of the different Elvish peoples, a note on the pronunciation of Elvish names, and a list of some of the chief elements found in these names, and a map. It may be noted that the great mountain range in the east, Luthien or Lindon, the Blue Mountains, appears in the extreme west of the map in The Lord of the Rings. In the body of the book, there is a smaller map. The intention of this is to make clear at a glance where lay the kingdom of the elves after the return of the Noldor to Middle-earth. I have not burdened the book further with any sort of commentary or annotation. In the difficult and doubtful task of preparing the text of the book, I was very greatly assisted by Guy Kay, who worked with me in 1974 to 1975. Christopher Tolkien, 1977. So that is the foreword to the book. Oh, thanks. Yeah, it really is like kind of a long-winded way of saying, hey guys, I know that this is problematic, but bear with me. Which I give him credit, because I can't imagine how long it took to sift through all the different drafts of these various tales and try to put them into some sort of chronological order that makes any kind of sense. Shared the Twitch link on Dawn's Discord. Thank you so much, Monday Night. I appreciate that. Hey everyone over on TikTok. My name is Kris. I am streaming over on Twitch. If you would like to see any visuals, the experience will be far nicer over on my Twitch channel. So you can follow the link up in my bio over to my Twitch and join us there. All right, so the next bit is actually written in 1999, which is kind of nice because Christopher Tolkien recently passed away. I believe he passed away January of 2020, if I remember correctly. So unfortunately, he's gone now too. But he did write a preface to the second edition of the book. This is the second and revised edition of the Silmarillion. So we will read that preface, and then we'll move on to a letter that's actually written by Tolkien, J.R.R. Tolkien, to Milton Waldman in 1951. So first the preface, and then the letter. All right, preface to the second edition. Probably towards the end of 1951, when The Lord of the Rings was completed but difficulties lay in the way of its publication, my father wrote a very long letter to his friend Milton Waldman, at the time an editor of the publishing house of Collins, aka HarperCollins. The context and occasion of this letter lay in the painful differences that arose over my father's insistence that the Silmarillion and the Lord of the Rings should be published in conjunction or in connection, as one long saga of the jewels and the rings. There is, however, no need to enter into this matter here. The letter that he wrote with a view to justifying and explaining his contention emerged as a brilliant exposition of his conception of the earlier ages. The latter part of the letter, as he himself said, was no more than a long and yet bald resume of the narrative of The Lord of the Rings. And it is for this reason that I believe that it merits inclusion within the covers of the Silmarillion, as is done in this edition. The original letter is lost, but Milton Waldman had a typescript made of it and sent a copy to my father. It was from this copy that the letter was printed in part in the Letters of J.R.R. Tolkien, published in 1981. Number 131, in case you want to reference it. The text given here is that in Letters, page 143 to 157, with minor corrections and the omission of some of the footnotes. There were many errors in the typescript, especially in names. These were very largely corrected by my father, but he did not observe the sentence on paragraph 23. Quote, "There was nothing wrong essentially in their lingering against counsel, still sadly with the mortal lands of their old heroic deeds," end quote. Here, the typist certainly omitted words in the manuscript and perhaps misread those given as well. I have removed a number of errors in the text and index, which until now have escaped correction in the hardback printings only of the Silmarillion. Chief among these are those that concern the numbering in sequence of certain of the rulers of Numenor. These errors and an explanation of how they arose can be seen in The Unfinished Tales, published 1980, page 226, note 11, and The Peoples of Middle-earth, which is the final book of the history of Middle-earth, by the way, published in 1996, page 154, paragraph 31. So, Christopher Tolkien, 1999. So that was just his little note to be included and explaining why there is a letter at the beginning of this book. So the upcoming letter that I will read is from J.R.R. Tolkien himself. All right, how are we doing, everybody? Oh, I'm so glad. I'm so glad you're enjoying it. All right, let me take a bit of a drink and then we'll get started on the letter. Now, just to give you a fair warning, this letter is a bit lengthy. So it will take a little bit of time to go through, which is why I wanted to just do all of this stuff prior to the, formal reading of the Silmarillion. So you guys get a little bit of background. Stuff can be explained by Tolkien, but let's see, it's like 16 pages long. So it's a substantial letter. We will try to get through the whole thing. If we don't, that is okay. We will continue it in the next stream. I will be streaming once a week to try and get through the Silmarillion in a timely fashion so that everyone can enjoy this Silmarillion before the actual TV series comes out in about 13 months. So the Amazon series we are all looking forward to, and having a bit of knowledge of the background of The Lord of the Rings and specifically the Silmarillion is going to give you a huge leg up on understanding what is going on in the Second Age where the TV show is supposed to take place. And we did see that there will be some sort of flashback, so it'll give you a greater appreciation for all of the detail whenever we see those flashback scenes that happen in the time of the Two Trees or sometime in the First Age. So looking forward to seeing all of those details, and hopefully by coming along with me and reading the Silmarillion, or listening to me read it rather, you will be able to greater appreciate all of the work that the creators are doing for the Amazon show. Let's take a bit of a drink and we'll get started on the letter. All right. Shift to, I'm sitting on my legs because I'm one of those people that never sits normally. Which means that one leg is completely numb. All right. Here we go. All right. From a letter by J.R.R. Tolkien to Milton Waldman, 1951. My dear Milton, You asked for a brief sketch of my stuff that is connected with my imaginary world. It is difficult to say anything without saying too much. The attempt to say a few words opens a floodgate of excitement. The egoist and artist at once desires to say how the stuff has grown, what it is like, and what he thinks he means or is trying to represent by it all. I shall inflict some of this on you, but I will append a mere resume of its contents, which is, maybe, all that you want or will have use or time for. I love the tone of this letter. He's very self-aware, Tolkien. In order of time, growth, and composition, this stuff began with me, though I do not suppose that that is of much interest to anyone but myself. I mean, I do not remember a time when I was not building it. Many children make up or begin to make up imaginary languages. I have been at it since I could write. But I have never stopped, and of course, as a professional philologist, especially interested in linguistic aesthetics, I have changed in taste, improved in theory, and probably in craft. Behind my stories is now a nexus of languages, mostly only structurally sketched, but to those creatures which in English I call misleadingly elves, are assigned two related languages more nearly completed, whose history is written, and whose forms, representing two different sides of my own linguistic taste, are deduced scientifically from a common origin. Out of these languages are made nearly all of the names that appear in my legends. This gives a certain character, a cohesion, a consistency of linguistic style, and an illusion of historicity to the nomenclature, or so I believe, that is markedly lacking in other comparable things. Not all will feel this is pardon me. Not all will feel this is as important as I do, since I am cursed by acute sensibility in such matters. But an equally basic passion of mine, ab initio, was for myth, not allegory, and for fairy story, and above all for heroic legend on the brink of fairy tale and history, of which there is far too little in the world accessible to me for my appetite. He wanted to fill the void of fairy tales for himself. I was an undergraduate before thought and experience revealed to me that these were not divergent interests, opposite poles of science and romance, but integrally related. I am not learned, quote unquote, in the matters of myth and fairy story, however, for in such things, as far as known to me, I have always been seeking material, things of a certain tone and air, and not simple knowledge. Also, and here I hope I shall not sound absurd, I was from early days grieved by the poverty of my own beloved country. It has no stories of its own, bound up with its tongue and soil, not of the quality that I sought, and found, as an ingredient, in legends of other lands. What he means here is that England itself didn't have its own folklore. It was borrowed from other cultures, but there was nothing native to the British at the time. So he was lamenting this fact. There was Greek and Celtic and Romance, Germanic, Scandinavian, and Finnish, which greatly affected me, but nothing English save impoverished chapbook stuff. He's so derogatory about the term chapbook. Of course, there was and is all the Arthurian world, but powerful as it is imperfectly naturalized, associated with the soil of Britain, but not with the English, and does not replace what I felt to be missing. For one thing, its fairy is too lavish and fantastical, incoherent and repetitive. For another and more important thing, it is involved in and explicitly contains the Christian religion. For reasons which I will not elaborate, that seems to me fatal. Myth and fairy story must, as all art, reflect and contain in solution elements of moral and religious truth or error, but not explicit, not in the known form of the primary real world. I am speaking, of course, of our present situation, and not of ancient pagan pre-Christian days, and I will not repeat what I tried to say in my essay, which you read. Do not laugh! But once upon a time, my crest has long since fallen, I had a mind to make a body of more or less connected legend, ranging from the large and cosmogonic, what a word, to the level of romantic fairy story, the larger founded on the lesser in contact with the earth, the lesser drawing splendor from the vast backcloths, which I could dedicate simply to England, my country. It should possess the tone and quality that I desired, somewhat cool and clear, be redolent of our air, the clime and soil of the Northwest, meaning Britain and the higher parts of Europe, not Italy or the Aegean, still less the East, and while possessing, if I could achieve it, the fair elusive beauty that some call Celtic, though it is rarely found in genuine ancient Celtic things. It should be high, quote-unquote, purged of the gross and fit for the more adult mind of a land now steeped in poetry. I would draw some of the great tales in fullness, and leave many only placed in the scheme and sketched. The cycles should be linked to a majestic whole, and yet leave scope for other minds and hands, wielding paint and music and drama. Absurd. So this is his own concept, what he was yearning to create, but he now, in the course of this letter, thinks it a bit childish a notion, and a bit of a long reach for his own talents, which is oddly humble for someone who completely revolutionized fantasy writing as we know it. But he says absurd. Of course, such an overweening purpose did not develop all at once. The mere stories were a thing. They arose in my mind as, quote, given things, and as they came separately, so too the links grew. An absorbing, though continually interrupted labor, since, especially even part from the necessities of life, the mind would wing to the other pole and spend itself on the linguistics. Yet always I had the sense of recording what was already, quote, there, somewhere, not of inventing. Of course, I made up and even wrote lots of other things, especially for my children. Some escaped from the grasp of this branching, acquisitive theme, being ultimately and radically unrelated. And he gives examples here. Leaf by Nigel and Farmer Giles, or Giles? Farmer Giles? I'm assuming. For instance, the only two that have been printed. The Hobbit, which has much more essential life in it, was quite independently conceived. I did not know as I began it that it belonged to this overarching world, he means. But it proved to be the discovery of the completion of the whole, its mode of descent to earth, and merging into history. As the high legends of the beginnings are supposed to look at things through elvish minds, so the middle tale of The Hobbit takes a virtually human point of view, and the last tale blends them, the last tale being The Lord of the Rings. I dislike allegory, the conscious and intentional allegory. Yet, any attempt to explain the purport of myth or fairy tale must use allegorical language. And of course, the more life a story has, the more readily it will be susceptible of allegorical interpretations. While the better a deliberate allegory is made, the more nearly it will be acceptable just as a story. Anyway, all this stuff is mainly concerned with fall, morality, and the machine. So keep that in mind. Fall, as in fall from grace, morality, and the machine. With a capital M. With fall, inevitably, and that motive occurs in several modes. With morality, it's mortality, not morality. I misread, I apologize. So, fall, mortality, and the machine. With fall inevitably, and the motive occurs in several modes. With mortality, especially as it affects art and the creative, or as I should say, sub-creative, desire which seems to have no biological function, and to be apart from the satisfactions of plain ordinary biological life, with which, in our world, it is indeed usually at strife. This desire is at once wedded to a passionate love of the real primary world, and hence filled with the sense of mortality, and yet unsatisfied by it. It has various opportunities of fall. It may become possessive, clinging to the things made as its own, quote-unquote. The sub-creator wishes to be the lord and god of his private creation. He will rebel against the laws of the creator, especially against mortality. Both of these, alone or together, will lead to the desire for power, for making the will more quickly effective, and so too the machine, or magic. By the last, I intend all use of external plans or devices, apparatus, instead of developments of the inherent powers or talents, or even the use of these talents with the corrupted motive of dominating, bulldozing the real world, or coercing other wills. The machine is our more obvious modern form, though more closely related to magic than is usually recognized. I realize that this is tough language to understand. So basically what Tolkien is saying here is that these are the major themes that he drew upon, and when creating fairy tales, you do sort of have to come up with solutions for these various problems. The machine is sort of, it's both the present world as we see it, with all of our modern technology and such, but also the sense of magic in the world. It's an outside force that influences the world as we know it, be that the technology that we've created or something outside of that that, sparks that creation. But that it is eventually inevitably tied with mortality and lust for power. So he's just discussing these things. I'm gonna shift again. Okay. I have not used magic consistently, and indeed the Elven Queen Galadriel is obliged to remonstrate with the hobbits on their confused use of the word, both for the devices and operations of the enemy, and for those of the elves. AKA, the hobbits feel like magic is on both sides of this equation, and Galadriel doesn't do the best job of dissuading them from that. I have not because there is not a word for the latter, since all human stories have suffered the same confusion. But the elves are there, in my tales, to demonstrate the difference. Their magic, quote-unquote, is art, delivered from many of its human limitations, more effortless, more quick, more complete, product and vision in unflawed correspondence. And its object is art, not power, subcreation, not domination, and tyrannous reforming of creation. The elves are immortal, at least as far as this world goes, and hence are concerned rather with the griefs and burdens of death, the griefs and burdens of deathlessness in time and change than with death. So they aren't really concerned with death, but the actual burden of not dying, which is a bit of a juxtaposition. The enemy, in successive forms, is always naturally concerned with sheer domination, unlike the elves. And so the Lord of Magic and Machines. But the problem, that this frightful evil can and does arise from an apparently good root, the desire to benefit the world and others, speedily and according to the benefactor's own plans, is a recurrent motive. AKA, even evil has its root in good intentions, typically. And this is his way of saying that the creation of Morgoth and Sauron, by extension, was supposed to have deeper meaning and deeper motivation than just their pure evil. This is why I personally read a lot into Sauron and Morgoth as characters that isn't explicitly there, because Tolkien himself says that evil is not there simply for evil's sake. And I like that. I like that a lot. All right, continuing on. There's a bit of a break here in the letter, but let's continue. The cycles begin with a cosmogonical myth, the music of the Ainur. God and the Valar, or powers, Englished as gods, are revealed. These latter are, as we should say, angelic powers, whose function is to exercise delegated authority in their spheres of rule and government, not creation, making or remaking. They are divine, that is, were originally outside and existed before the making of the world. Their power and wisdom is derived from their knowledge, with a capital K, of the cosmogonical drama, which they perceived first as a drama, that is, in a fashion we perceive a story composed by someone else, and later as a reality. On the side of mere narrative device, this is, of course, meant to provide beings of the same order of beauty, power, and majesty as the gods of higher mythology, which can yet be accepted, well, shall we say baldly, by a mind that believes in the Blessed Trinity. What he is saying here is he created the Ainur in a fashion that it would be readily accepted by those who are most familiar with the Christian mythos. So there is a leaning toward that, not necessarily with the intention of imitating the Holy Trinity, but so that it would be close enough that people who believe in the Holy Trinity would fall into that suspension of disbelief. It would be believable enough for them to go with it. It moves then swiftly to the history of the elves, or the Silmarillion proper, to the world as we perceive it, but of course transfigured in a still half-mythical mode. That is, it deals with rationale incarnate, creation... That is, it deals with rational incarnate creatures of more or less comparable stature with our own. People like us, basically. The knowledge of the creation drama was incomplete. Incomplete in the each individual god, and incomplete if all the knowledge of the pantheon were pooled. AKA, if all of the Valar came together and they told the elves everything, they would still have an incomplete picture of the entire drama, the entire plan, if you will, of the world. Hey, Tin Fizzy, thank you so much. Thanks for spending those points. Hi, guys. Alright, where was I? So even if the knowledge of the pantheon were pooled, it still wouldn't give the elves a complete picture of creation. It's incomplete. For, partly to redress the evil of the rebel Melkor, partly for the completion of all in an ultimate finesse of detail, the Creator had not revealed all. The making and nature of the children of God were the two chief secrets. All that the gods knew was that they would come, at appointed times. The children of God are thus primevally related and akin, and primevally different. Since also they are something wholly other to the gods, in the making of which the gods played no part. They are the object of the special desire and love of the gods. These are the firstborn, the elves, and the followers, men, mortal men. The doom of the elves is to be immortal, to love the beauty of the world, to bring it to full power with their gifts of delicacy and perfection, to last while it lasts, never leaving it even when slain, but returning, and yet, when the followers came to teach them and make way for them, to fade, as in the elves then fade, as the followers grow and absorb the life from which both proceed. So, aka, as the elves get on and the followers or mortal men come into the picture, there is sort of an inverse relationship. the more men come to prevalence, the more the elves over time eventually fade into irrelevance and pass from the world. But that is part of their sorrow, that they are doomed to be immortal, and thus see the world go through these cycles and bring it to full splendor from their own skills, only to see their own prevalence in the world fade away. Okay, where was I? Okay. The doom, or the gift, of men is mortality, freedom from the cycles of the world. Since the point of view of the whole cycle is the elvish, mortality is not explained mythically. It is a mystery of God, of which no more is known than what God has purposed for men is hidden. A grief and an envy to the immortal elves. So the elves actually envy this quality in the men. It's a really interesting part, I think, because you have mortal men who end up being obsessed with their own mortality and want and lust for the immortality of the elves, and yet the elves, because they exist more or less immortally, even if they die, they become reincarnated basically over in Valinor. Because of that, they themselves are obsessed with death. They think it's some adventure that they will never get to go on themselves. And so you have both the children of Iluvatar sort of lusting after their own uniqueness, but from the opposite group. I like that balance that Tolkien worked into his world. As I say, the legendary Silmarillion is peculiar and differs from all similar things that I know in not being anthropocentric. Its center of view and interest is not men, but elves. Men come in, inevitably. After all, the author is a man. If he has an audience, they will be men, and men must come into our tales, as such, and not merely transfigured or partially represented as elves, dwarves, hobbits, etc. But they remain peripheral, latecomers, and however growingly important, not principals. So, it's not about you guys. It's not about you guys, men. It's about the elves. I'm going to take a moment to answer some questions here. Are the Valar gods or just high-ranking archangels? It's just semantics. So the answer's yes. Yes to both. They cannot create of their own will, but they are given a certain power to make or remake in their own personal sphere of existence. And I mean that in that if you are the god or the archangel or whatever, however you'd like to term it, if you are the god of air, then when you create clouds, you aren't actually creating them from scratch because you have been gifted a certain power within that sphere to make things or remake things. So the creation isn't, in its truest sense, making something out of nothing. It's hard to explain. So there is a hierarchy that Tolkien creates, but ultimately there is only one god, and he did that specifically to appeal to the mind of those who are of Judeo-Christian belief sets, to make it easier for people to understand his world and his theology that he built in to the Silmarillion. Nobody's ever happy with what they have, basically. Regarding elves and men, that's basically it. Say the elves live to die, and the men are dying to live forever. Right? Are the elves stagnant due to their immortality? Not so much stagnant, because without the limit of time, men have only limited days, right? With elves, even if they do get slain, they get reincarnated. So there is no sense of we don't have enough time. It's we have the time and we will eventually perfect a given skill. So the elves' magic isn't so much magic as it is skill developed over an infinite amount of time. skills can be perfected if you have unlimited time. So mortal men don't have that option, but the elves, over thousands of years, can get to a certain proficiency and efficiency that it seems like magic to mortal eyes or ears or senses. So I hope that explains it. Valor can only manipulate at higher levels. Yes. They can manipulate at high levels. That's a great way of putting it. All right, shall we continue? I think I'll take a bit of a drink break here. Need to put my bookmark in the spot so I won't lose my place. Thank you guys for sticking with me so long. Oof. Once again with my sitting in weird positions, making my legs go numb. Okay. So, men are not the principals of this story. That's where we were. In the cosmogony, there is a fall of angels, we should say, though quite different in form, of course, to that of Christian myth. These tales are new. They are not directly derived from other myths and legends, but they must inevitably contain a large measure of ancient widespread motives or elements. After all, I believe that legends and myths are largely made of truth, and indeed present aspects of it that can only be received in this mode. And long ago, certain truths and modes of this kind were discovered and must always reappear. There cannot be any story without a fall. All stories are ultimately about the fall, at least not for human minds as we know them and have them. So, proceeding, the elves have a fall before their history can become storial. And then in parentheses it says, the first fall of man, for reasons explained, nowhere appears. Men do not come on the stage until all of that is long past, and there is only a rumor that for a while they fell under the domination of the enemy, and that some repented. So we don't cover the fall of men in this book, but we can assume that it happened. The main body of the tale, the Silmarillion proper, is about the fall of the most gifted kindred of the elves, their exile from Valinor, a kind of paradise, the home of the gods, in the furthest west, their re-entry into Middle-earth, the land of their birth, but long under the rule of the enemy, and their strife with him, the power of evil still visible incarnate. It receives its name because the events are all threaded upon the fate and significance of the Silmarilli, which translates to radiance of pure light, or primeval jewels. The jewels! By the making of gems, the sub-creative function of the elves is chiefly symbolized. But the Silmarilli were more than just beautiful things as such. There was light. There was the light of Valinor, made visible in the two trees of silver and gold. And if you're on TikTok, those are the trees. I have the graphic up on my TikTok. Alright. The two trees of silver and gold. These were slain by the enemy out of malice, and Valinor was darkened, though from them, ere they died utterly, were derived the lights of the sun and moon. A marked difference here between these legends and most others is that the sun is not a divine symbol, but a second best thing. And the light of the sun, the world under the sun, becomes terms for a fallen world and dislocated, imperfected vision. So the sun here is not considered a divine symbol, it's actually a source of sadness, because this was the second best thing, the first best thing being the trees in Valinor. It's kind of a different thing compared to all other creation myths, where the sun plays a very prominent, godlike function. Think of Apollo. We get an origin tale for the elves and the dwarves, but what about man and the hobbits? That's basically what he's saying, is that the Silmarillion doesn't cover that. That you can assume there was one, but it's not covered in this book. So, Sorry. Can't help that. Is there a first man and women tale explored by Tolkien? Not to my knowledge. Not to my knowledge. He sort of skips over that fact. I think because he deems the elves more interesting. Because of their difference to mortal man. It's just sort of and they awoke somewhere. In this general vicinity, they woke. And that's where he leaves it. As far as the Perianath, the hobbits are concerned, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if we have a full creation myth associated with them that Tolkien wrote. Again, not to my knowledge. I could be wrong. If New Beta Do Beta is still here, let me know. You have a bit better knowledge when it comes to the broader sense. My specialty is honestly on the Ainur, these godlike creatures, and the elves. But that's because I specifically studied them for a long time. Oh, thank you so much, Kate Monster. I appreciate that. Hi! I am glad you like my content. Okay. Where were we? So the sun and moon are the next best things, is what they were saying. But the chief artificer of the elves, Feyenoord, had imprisoned the light of Valinor in 3 supreme jewels, the Silmarilli, before the trees were sullied or slain. This light thus lived thereafter only in these gems. The fall of the elves comes about through the possessive attitude of Feyenoord and his 7 sons to these gems. They are captured by the enemy, set in his iron crown, and guarded in his impenetrable stronghold. The sons of Feyenoord take a terrible and blasphemous oath of enmity and vengeance against all or any, even the gods, who dare to claim any part or right in the Silmarilli. They pervert the greater part of their kindred, who rebel against the gods, and depart from paradise and go to make hopeless war upon the enemy. The first fruit of their fall is war in paradise, the slaying of elves by elves. And this and their evil oath dogs all of their later heroism, generating treacheries and undoing all victories. So again, this is the theme of the fall. This is why the Silmarils are the central, the crux of this entire tale. So, all victories are undone. That stinks. The Silmarillion is the history of the war of the exiled elves against the enemy, which all takes place in the northwest of the world, Middle-earth. Several tales of victory and tragedy are caught up in it, but it ends with catastrophe and the passing of the ancient world, the world of the long First Age. The jewels are recovered by the final intervention of the gods, only to be lost forever to the elves, one in the sea, one in the depths of earth, and one as a star of heaven. This legendarium ends with a vision of the end of the world, its breaking and remaking, and the recovery of the Silmarilli and the light before the sun, after a final battle which owes, I suppose, more to the Norse vision of Ragnarok than anything else, though it is not much like it. So there's basically a summary of what you can expect in the Silmarillion. It's all about the fall. It's all about these elves and their struggle against Morgoth to try and reclaim the Silmarils, and we just heard what happens. It's a spoiler alert. Spoiler alert. Do the Silmarils have a magical pull to them? What makes people drawn to them? Again, you can call it magic, but you can just call it the intense, long-term skill developed by Feyenoord, who is an elf. The power of the Silmarils is not just in the light and the skill that they were created with, but also what they represent. They represent everything that was good and light and right in the world. And yet, because of the vengeance and because of this jealous, possessive attitude that Feyenoord has, because he values them over everything else, that corrupts. So it's both that people are drawn to them, but also people are willing to sacrifice other things for that, and the power struggle that then, that then follows. It follows suit. Okay. As the stories become less mythical and more like stories and romances, men are interwoven. For the most part, these are good men, quote-unquote, families and their chiefs who, rejecting the service of evil and hearing rumors of the gods in the west and the high elves, flee westward and come into contact with the exiled elves in the midst of their war. The men who appear are mainly those of 3 houses of the fathers of men, whose chieftains become allies of the elf lords. The contact of men and elves already foreshadows the history of the later ages, and a recurrent theme is the idea that in men, as they are now, there is a strand of blood and inheritance derived from the elves, and that the art and poetry of men is largely dependent on it, or modified by it. There is a footnote here that says, of course, in reality, this only means that my elves are only a representation or an apprehension of a part of human nature, but that is not the legendary mode of talking. There are thus 2 marriages of mortal and elf, both later coalescing in the kindred of Eärendil, represented by Elrond, the half-elven, who appears in all the stories, even The Hobbit, the chief of these stories of the Silmarillion, and the one most fully treated is the story of Beren and Luthien, the elf maiden. Here we meet, among other things, the first example of the motive to become dominant in hobbits. That the great policies of world history, the wheels of the world, are often turned not by the lords and governors, even gods, but by the seemingly unknown and weak, owing to the secret of life in creation, and the part unknowable to all wisdom but one capitalized, the one, that resides in the intrusions of the children of God into the great drama. It is Beren, the outlawed mortal, who succeeds, with the help of Luthien, a mere maiden, even if an elf of royalty, where all the armies and warriors have failed. He penetrates the stronghold of the enemy and wrests one of the Silmarilli from the Iron Crown. Thus he wins the hand of Luthien, and the first marriage of mortal and immortal is achieved. Again, spoiler alert. Oh, thank you so much, Kate Monster. Enjoy supper. Elrond is the real main character. Elrond is just a consistent character. He is present in all of the books, which is kind of cool, and that's one thing that we can really enjoy seeing in the Amazon TV series, is hopefully that presence of Elrond, because it's something that does carry over from age to age. He's present in the First Age. He was born in the First Age. He's present throughout the entirety of the Second Age, being one of great standing and being kind of the right-hand elf, if you will, of Gil-galad, who becomes the High King of the Noldor, the last High King of the Noldor. But being a Perithel, or a half-elf, Elrond is unique in that his position within the world is halfway between the elves and the humans, he and his twin brother Elros. So in that, you have this whole splintering of elves and men. You have this splintering of elves and men into the Númenórean line, which is Elros once he chooses to be counted amongst the mortals, and the continuance of Elrond's line in Arwen that eventually comes back and around and ties together with Aragorn, who is a long line descendant of Elros. So yes, Arwen and Aragorn are technically related. They are cousins several hundred times removed. not hundreds of times, but many generations. About, I want to say, because it involves the entire Second Age plus the Third Age, we're talking 6,000 years. So however many generations we end up going through, even though the Númenóreans are longer lived than your typical mortal men, that's quite a few generations removed. Elrond just became your favorite elf. He's an awesome elf, and I mean, the poor guy goes through so much. So much. We will touch on that a little bit. Okay, where were we? So thus Beren wins the hand of Luthien, and the first marriage of mortal and immortal is achieved. As such, the story is, I think, a beautiful and powerful heroic fairy romance. All hyphenated. Receivable in itself with only a very general, vague knowledge of the background. But it is also a fundamental link in the cycle, deprived of its full significance, out of its place therein. So the story could be told on its own, and indeed, Beren and Luthien is a standalone book that was published after Tolkien's death. But you don't get a true sense of the importance of all of these events unless you view it within the greater story of the Silmarillion and future books like The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. So it doesn't take on its special deep significance if it's not seen as part of this bigger whole. Okay. For the capture of the Silmaril, a supreme victory leads to disaster. The oath of the Sons of Feyenoord becomes operative, and lust for the Silmaril brings all of the kingdoms of the elves to ruin. There are other stories almost equally full in treatment and equally independent and yet linked to the general history. There is The Children of Húrin, again, another book that was published separately as well. The tragic tale of Turin Turambar and his sister Níniel, of which Turin is the hero, a figure that might be said by people who like that sort of thing, though it is not very helpful, to be derived from elements in Sigurd the Volsung, Oedipus, and the Finnish Kullervo. These are other stories. Other, fairy tales, myths, legends. There is the Fall of Gondolin, the chief elvish stronghold, and the tale or tales of Eärendil the Wanderer. He is important as the person who brings the Silmarillion to its end, and as providing in his offspring the main links to and persons in the tales of the later ages, including Elrond, by the way. His function as a representative of both kindreds, elves and men, is to find a sea passage back to the land of the gods, and as ambassador, persuade them to take thought again for the exiles and pity them, and to rescue them from the enemy. His wife Elwing descends from Luthien and still possesses the Silmaril. But the curse still works, and Eärendil's home is destroyed by the Sons of Feyenoord. But this provides the solution. Elwing, casting herself into the sea to save the jewel, comes to Eärendil, and with the power of the great gem, they pass at last to Valinor and accomplish their errand, at the cost of never being allowed to return or dwell again with elves or men. So, they succeed, but at a cost, as one would expect. The gods then move again, and great power comes out of the west, and the stronghold of the enemy is destroyed, and he himself is thrust out of the world into the void, never to reappear there in the incarnate form again. The remaining 2 Silmarils are regained from the Iron Crown, only to be lost. The last 2 sons of Fëanor, compelled by their oath, steal them and are destroyed by them, casting themselves into the sea and into the pits of the earth. The ship of Eärendil, adorned with the last Silmaril, is set in heaven as the brightest star. So ends the Silmarillion and the tales of the First Age. So that is Tolkien's own summary of the entire Silmarillion, which is very spoiler heavy, but the joy is in all the details of the telling of this history. So I very much enjoy the Silmarillion, even though we just heard a basic summary of the entirety of it. Hey, Blue Gypsy, welcome! Welcome. We are reading a letter by J.R.R. Tolkien that is at the front end of the Silmarillion. And we have not hit any nice illustrations yet, so there's nothing to really show. Hey, Willie Washington, welcome. Join me over on my Twitch channel if you'd like to have a better viewing experience than this. Alright, so shall we continue? There's another break in the letter here. But let's see where we're at. There's quite a long way to go. We've still got another 8 pages or so. 7.5 to 8 pages. Let's continue. So that was the summary of the Silmarillion. The next cycle deals, or would deal, with the Second Age, but it is on Earth a dark age, and not very much of its history is, or need be told. In the great battles against the first enemy, the lands were broken and ruined, and the west of Middle-earth became desolate. We learn that the exiled elves were, if not commanded, at least sternly counseled to return to the west, and there be at peace. They were not to dwell permanently in Valinor again, but in the lonely isle of Erisea, within sight of the Blessed Realm. The men of the three houses were rewarded for their valor and faithful alliance by being allowed to dwell westernmost of all mortals, quote unquote, in the great Atlantis Isle of Numenor. The doom or gift of God, of mortality, the gods of course cannot abrogate, but the Numenorians have a great span of life. They set sail and leave Middle-earth and establish a great kingdom of mariners just within furthest sight of Erisea, but not of Valinor. So they can see Tol Eressëa, the island of the elves, but they cannot see Valinor proper. They're too far away. Most of the high elves depart, also back into the west, not all. Some men akin to the Numenorians remain in land not far from the shores of the sea. Some of the exiles will not return, or delay their return, for the way west is ever open to the immortals, and in the Grey Havens ships are ever ready to sail away forever. Also, orcs, goblins, and other monsters bred by the first enemy are not wholly destroyed. And there is Sauron. In the Silmarillion, the Tales of the First Age, Sauron was a being of Valinor perverted to the service of the enemy and becoming his chief captain and servant. He repents in fear when the first enemy is utterly defeated, but in the end does not do as was commanded, return to the judgment of the gods. He lingers in Middle-earth. Very slowly, beginning with fair motives, the reorganizing and rehabilitation of the ruin of Middle-earth, neglected by the gods, quote-unquote, he becomes a reincarnation of evil, and a thing lusting for complete power, and so consumed ever more fiercely with hate, especially of gods and elves. All through the twilight of the Second Age, the shadow is growing in the east of Middle-earth, spreading its sway more and more over men, who multiply as the elves begin to fade. The three main themes are thus the decaying elves that lingered in Middle-earth, Sauron's growth to a new Dark Lord, master and god of men, and Numenor Atlantis. Those are the three main portions of the Second Age. They are dealt with analytically, and in two tales or accounts, The Rings of Power and The Downfall of Numenor. Both are the essential background to The Hobbit and its sequel, The Lord of the Rings. In the first, we see a sort of second fall, or at least error, in the elves. There was nothing wrong essentially in their lingering against council, still sadly with the mortal lands of their old heroic deeds. And a footnote there says that some of the words were omitted by the typists in that sentence. So, there was nothing wrong essentially in their lingering against council, still sadly with the mortal lands of their old heroic deeds. But they wanted to have their cake without eating it. They wanted the peace and bliss and perfect harmony of the West, and yet to remain on the ordinary earth where their prestige was the highest people. And, where their prestige as the highest people above wild elves, dwarves, and men was greater than at the bottom of the hierarchy in Valinor. So basically, those who stayed didn't stay with the best motives, and this is where I start harping on Galadriel. Because she stayed because she wanted to be queen of her own land rather than just some elf over in Valinor. She stayed out of a lust for power. And she was not the only one. Okay. They thus became obsessed with fading, the mode in which the changes of time, the law of the world under the sun, was perceived by them. They became sad, and their art, shall we say antiquarian, and their efforts all really a kind of embalming, even though they also retained the old motive of their kind, the adornment of earth and the healing of its hurts. We hear of a lingering kingdom in the extreme northwest, more or less in what was left of the old lands of the Silmarillion, under Gil-galad, and of other settlements such as Imladris, Rivendell, near Elrond, and a great one at Eregion in the western feet of the Misty Mountains, adjacent to the mines of Moria, the major realm of the dwarves in the Second Age. The major realm of the dwarves in the Second Age. By the way, my shirt says Team Khazad-dûm. It says it in Dwarvish runes, the Angarthas Moria. So, in case you were wondering what my shirt says, it says Team Khazad-dûm, which was the main dwelling of the elves in what was later called Moria. So the name of the realm was actually Khazad-dûm, not Moria. Hey, you learned something! Is the Fall of Gondolin the First Age or the Second Age? It's at the latter part of the First Age. The Fall of Gondolin is the longest standing realm against the enemy. It lasts the longest, but it does fall. Gondolin does fall, and it falls before the end of the First Age. It adds to that whole sense of the only way the elves are getting out of this is with divine help from the far west in Valinor. So yes, even Gondolin gets taken out before the end of the First Age. Shifting once again. Okay. So talking about the various realms that we see, including Moria, a major realm of the dwarves in the Second Age. There arose a friendship between the usually hostile folk of elves and dwarves for the first and only time, and smithcraft reached its highest development. But many of the elves listened to Sauron. He was still fair in that early time, and his motives and those of the elves seemed to go partly together, the healing of desolate lands. Sauron found their weak point in suggesting that, helping one another, they could make Western Middle-earth as beautiful as Valinor. It was really a veiled attack on the gods, an incitement to try and make a separate, independent paradise. Gil-galad repulsed all such overtures, and also did Elrond. But at Eregion, great work began, and the elves came their nearest to falling to magic and machinery. With the aid of Sauron's lore, they made the Rings of Power. Power is an ominous and sinister word in all these tales, except as applied to the gods. The chief power of all the rings alike was the prevention or slowing of decay, i.e., that is, change viewed as a regrettable thing. The preservation of what is desired or loved, or its semblance, that is more or less an elvish motive. But also they enhanced the natural powers of the possessor, thus approaching magic, a motive easily corruptible into evil, a lust for domination. And finally they had other powers, more directly derived from Sauron, the Necromancer, quote-unquote. So he is called as he casts a fleeting shadow and presage on the pages of The Hobbit. So when you read The Hobbit, if there is reference to the Necromancer, they are talking about Sauron, just a different name for him. And you will find there are many names for all the same people in these books. I will do my best to explain that as we go along. Oh, thank you so much for dual watching. I appreciate that. Okay. So, Necromancer. So, the rings also have other powers directly derived from Sauron, such as rendering invisible the material body and making things of the invisible world visible. The elves of Eregion made 3 supremely beautiful and powerful rings, almost solely of their own imagination, and directed to the preservation of beauty. They did not confer invisibility. So the 3 rings, Nenya, Vilya, and Narya, the 3 elven rings, did not have the power of invisibility attached to them because that was derived from Sauron. So, we're learning things. The elves of Eregion made the 3 supremely beautiful and powerful rings, almost solely of their own imagination, and directed to the preservation of beauty. They did not confer invisibility. But secretly, in the subterranean fire, in his own black land, Sauron made 1 ring, the ruling ring, that contained the powers of all the others and controlled them, so that its wearer could see all the thoughts of those that used the lesser rings, could govern all that they did, and in the end could utterly enslave them. He reckoned, however, without the wisdom and subtle perceptions of the elves. The moment he assumed the one, they were aware of it, and of his secret purpose, and were afraid. Rightfully so. They hid the 3 rings, so that not even Sauron ever discovered where they were, and they remained unsullied. The others they tried to destroy. Hi, Gray. My kitty was saying hello for a moment. In the resulting war between Sauron and the elves, Middle-earth, especially in the west, was further ruined. Eregion was captured and destroyed, and Sauron seized many rings of power. These he gave for their ultimate corruption and enslavement to those who would accept them, out of ambition or greed. Hence the ancient rhyme that appears as the leitmotif of The Lord of the Rings. It gives a poem here in red. 3 rings for the elven kings under the sky, 7 for the dwarf lords in their halls of stone, 9 for mortal men doomed to die, 1 for the Dark Lord on his dark throne, in the land of Mordor where shadows lie. Sauron became thus almost supreme in Middle-earth. The elves held out in secret places not yet revealed. The last elf kingdom of Gil-galad is maintained precariously on the extreme west shores, where are the havens of the ships. Elrond, the half-elven son of Eärendil, maintains a kind of enchanted sanctuary at Imladris, in English Rivendell, on the extreme eastern margin of the western lands. But Sauron dominates all the multiplying hordes of men that have had no contact with the elves, and so indirectly with the true and unfallen Valar and gods. So mortal men at this point are so divorced from the elves that they don't have any true knowledge of the gods, the knowledge of which would have passed to them through the elves. Okay, back to Sauron. He rules a growing empire from the great dark tower of Barad-dûr in Mordor, near the Mountain of Fire, wielding the One Ring. But to achieve this, he had been obliged to let the great part of his own inherent power, a frequent and very significant motive in myth and fairy story, pass into the One Ring. While he wore it, his power on Earth was actually enhanced. But even if he did not wear it, that power existed and was in rapport with himself. He was not diminished. unless some other seized it and became possessed of it. If that happened, the new possessor could, if sufficiently strong and heroic by nature, challenge Sauron, become master of all that he had learned or done since the making of the One Ring, and so overthrow him and usurp his place. This was the essential weakness he had introduced into his situation in his effort, largely unsuccessful, to enslave the elves, and in his desire to establish control over the minds and wills of his servants. There was another weakness. If the One Ring was actually unmade, annihilated, then its power would be dissolved, Sauron's own being would be diminished to vanishing point, and he would be reduced to a shadow, a mere memory of malicious will. But that he never contemplated nor feared. The ring was unbreakable by any smithcraft less than his own. It was indissoluble in any fire save the undying subterranean fire where it was made, and that was unapproachable in Mordor. Also, so great was the ring's power of lust that anyone who used it became mastered by it. It was beyond the strength of any will, even his own, to injure it, cast it aside, or neglect it. So he thought. It was in any case on his finger. Sauron didn't think this was going to be a problem. He's like, well, it can only be dissolved in the fires where I made it, and it can only be done by someone with will to actually destroy it, and I built it so that no one would have that will. So he thought this was foolproof. He thought he had the best plan ever. He was wrong, as we all know from Lord of the Rings. Okay. Or so he thought. It was on his finger. Thus, the Second Age draws on. We have a great kingdom and evil theocracy, for Sauron is also the god of his slaves, growing up in Middle-earth. In the west, actually the northwest, is the only part clearly envisaged in these tales, lie the precarious refuges of the elves, while men in those parts remain more or less uncorrupted if ignorant. The better and nobler sort of men are, in fact, the kin of those that had departed to Numenor, but remain in a simple, Homeric style of patriarchal and tribal life. Meanwhile, Numenor has grown in wealth, wisdom, and glory under its lines of great kings of long life, directly descended from Elros, Eärendil's son, brother of Elrond. The downfall of Numenor, the second fall of man, or man rehabilitated but still mortal, brings on the catastrophic end, not only of the Second Age, but of the Old World, the primeval world of legend, envisaged as flat and bounded, meaning the world used to be flat. That's what he's saying here. After which the Third Age began, a twilight age, a medium avum, the first of the broken and changed world, the last of the lingering dominion of visible, fully incarnate elves, and the last also in which evil assumes a single dominant incarnate shape. The downfall is partly the result of an inner weakness in men, consequent, if you will, upon the first fall, unrecorded in these tales. The first fall being when men first came about, and some of them fell victim to evil, to the enemy. This is, during the First Age. But we don't have that tale written down, because the Silmarillion has to do with the elves, not so much the men. So we know that this fall occurred sometime in the First Age, when men were new to the world, and that they then tried to repent. So that's the first fall that is unrecorded. Repented but not finally healed. Reward on earth is more dangerous for men than punishment. The fall is achieved by the cunning of Sauron in exploiting this weakness. Its central theme is, inevitably I think in A Story of Men, a ban or prohibition. The Númenóreans dwell within far sight of the easternmost immortal land, Eressëa. and as the only men to speak an Elvish tongue, learned in the days of their alliance, they are in constant communication with their ancient friends and allies, either in the bliss of Eressëa or in the kingdom of Gil-galad on the shores of Middle-earth. This island of Numenor is between the two, but closer to Valinor than it is to Middle-earth. They became thus in appearance, and even in powers of mind, hardly distinguishable from the elves, but they remained mortal, even though rewarded by a triple, for more than a triple, span of years. Their reward is their undoing, or the means of their temptation. Their long life aids their achievements in art and wisdom, but breeds a possessive attitude to these things, and desire awakes for more time for their enjoyment. Foreseeing this in part, the gods laid a ban on the Númenóreans from the beginning. They must never sail to Eressëa, nor westward out of sight of their own land. In all other directions they could go as they would. They must not set foot on immortal lands, and so become enamored of an immortality within the world, which was against their law, the special doom or gift of Ilúvatar, the one god, and which their nature could not in fact endure. So don't do it. Don't step on immortal lands. Just don't do it. That's the one rule. You have one rule. You had one job. There are 3 phases in their fall from grace. First, acquiescence, obedience that is free and willing, through without complete understanding. So, ignorance. Then for long they obey unwillingly, murmuring more and more openly. Finally, they rebel, and a rift appears between the king's men and rebels, and the small minority of persecuted faithful. The ones who are like, no, we shouldn't go over there, guys. We're not supposed to. They told us not to. Those guys start being the minority and being punished for it. In the first stage, being men of peace, their courage is devoted to sea voyages. As descendants of Eärendil, they became the supreme mariners, and being barred from the west, they sailed to the utmost north and south and east. Mostly, they come to the west shores of Middle-earth, where they aid the elves and men against Sauron, and incur his undying hatred. In those days, they would come amongst wild men as almost divine benefactors, bringing gifts of arts and knowledge and passing away again, leaving many legends behind of kings and gods out of the sunset. So that's how they appeared to other mortal men. In the second stage, the days of pride and glory and grudging of the ban, they begin to seek wealth rather than bliss. The desire to escape death produced a cult of the dead, and they lavished wealth and art on tombs and memorials. They now made settlements on the west shores, but these became rather strongholds and factories of lords seeking wealth, and the Númenóreans became tax gatherers, carrying off over the sea more and more goods in their great ships. The Númenóreans began the forging of arms and engines. This phase ended, and the last began with the ascent of the throne by the 13th king in the line of Elros, Tar Carlion, the Golden, the most powerful and proud of all kings. Yeah, the hint there is golden. Greed. When Sauron loses his ring, is that the end of the Second Age or the sinking of Númenor homeland? Sauron losing the ring in the Battle of the Last Alliance, and a couple years following that is considered the end of the Second Age. That is the end. Okay, let's see, where was I? Okay, Tar Carlion the Golden, the most powerful and proud of all kings. When he learned that Sauron had taken the title of King of Kings and Lord of the World, he resolved to put down the Pretender. He goes in strength and majesty to Middle-earth, and so vast is his armament, and so terrible are the Númenóreans in the day of their glory, that Sauron's servants will not face them. Sauron humbles himself, does homage to Tar Carlion, and is carried off to Númenor as hostage and prisoner. he gives in without a fight. This should make you suspicious. But there he swiftly rises by his cunning and knowledge from servant to chief counselor of the king, and seduces the king and most of the lords and people with his lies. He denies the existence of God, saying that the One is a mere invention of the jealous Valar of the West, the oracle of their own wishes. The chief of the gods is he that dwells in the void, who will conquer in the end, and in the void make endless realms for his servants. The ban is only a lying device of fear to restrain the kings of men from seizing everlasting life and rivaling the Valar. These are the lies that Sauron tells. A new religion and worship of the dark, with its temple under Sauron, arises. He makes a dark cult, you guys. The faithful are persecuted and sacrificed. The Númenóreans carry their evil also to Middle-earth, and there become cruel and wicked lords of necromancy, slaying and tormenting men. And the old legends are overlaid with dark tales of horror. This does not happen, however, in the northwest. Excuse me. Okay, this does not happen, however, in the northwest, for thither, because of the elves, only the faithful who remain elf friends will come. The chief haven of the good Númenóreans is near the mouth of the great river Anduin. Thence, the still beneficent influence of Númenor spreads up the river and along the coast as far north as the realm of Gil-galad, as a common speech grows up. But at last Sauron's plot comes to fulfillment. Tar-Calion feels old age and death approaching, and he listens to the last prompting of Sauron, and building the greatest of all armadas, he sets sail to the west, breaking the ban, and going up with war to wrest from the gods everlasting life within the circles of the world. Faced by this rebellion of appalling folly and blasphemy, and also real peril, since the Númenóreans directed by Sauron could have wrought ruin in Valinor itself, the Valar lay down their delegated power and appeal to God, and receive the power and permission to deal with the situation. The world is broken and changed. A chasm is opened in the sea, and Tar-Calion and his armada are engulfed. Númenor itself, on the edge of the rift, topples and vanishes forever with all its glory in the abyss. Thereafter, there is no visible dwelling of the divine or immortal on earth. Valinor, or paradise, and even Eressëa are removed, remaining only in the memory of the earth. Men may sail now west, if they will, as far as they may, and come no nearer to Valinor or the Blessed Realm, but return only to the east and so back again. For the world is round and finite, and a circle inescapable, save by death. Only the immortals, the lingering elves, may still, if they will, wearying of the cycle of the world, take ship and find the straight way, and come to the ancient or true west and be at peace. So the world goes from being flat to being a sphere. This is when it happens. Basically, this end of the realm of Númenor is when the world gets reshaped, but the end of the Second Age is after the battle with Sauron that follows. So I hope that makes sense. There are two different things happening here, but the fall of Númenor is much like the story of Atlantis, and once Númenor is gone, the world is made into a sphere, and no amount of sailing will get you over to Valinor unless you are immortal. If you are immortal, or a ring bearer, as the case may be later on, you can hit a certain point in the ocean where you will leave the spherical earth and continue on the plane that used to be there. You will continue along the straight way, as they call it, to Valinor. So that's the only way it happens. Anyone else who tries won't get there. Okay. So the end of the Second Age draws on in a major catastrophe, but it is not quite yet concluded. See where I went there? From the Cataclysm, there are survivors. Elendil the Fair, chief of the faithful, his name means elf friend, and his sons Isildur and Anarion. Elendil, a Noachian figure, like Noah, a Noachian figure who has held off from the rebellion and kept ships manned and furnished off the east coast of Numenor, flees before the overwhelming storm of the wrath of the west, and is borne high upon the towering waves that bring ruin to the west of Middle-earth. He and his folk are cast away as exiles upon the shores. There they establish the Numenorean kingdoms of Arnor in the north close to the realm of Gil-galad, and Gondor at the mouths of the Anduin further south. Sauron, being an immortal, hardly escapes the ruin of Numenor and returns to Mordor, where after a while he is strong enough to challenge the exiles of Numenor. So Sauron, he's not destroyed. Because he is, in his own way, a divine creature. He can't just be easily destroyed like that. So only he and a few of the faithful survive the fall of Numenor. And from that we get Arnor in the northern part of the continent and Gondor, which we are familiar with from Lord of the Rings. Okay. The Second Age ends with the last alliance of elves and men, and the great siege of Mordor. It ends with the overflow... Oh my gosh, let me try that again. The Second Age ends with the last alliance of elves and men, and the great siege of Mordor. It ends with the overthrow of Sauron and destruction of the second visible incarnation of evil, but at a cost, and with one disastrous mistake. Gil-galad and Elendil are slain in the act of slaying Sauron. Isildur, Elendil's son, cuts the ring from Sauron's hand, and his power departs. And his spirit flees into the shadows. But the evil begins to work. Isildur claims the ring as his own, as the weregild of his father, and refuses to cast it into the fire nearby. He marches away, but is drowned in the great river, and the ring is lost, passing out of all knowledge. But it is not unmade, and the dark tower built with its aid still stands, empty but not destroyed. So ends the Second Age, with the coming of the Numenorean realms, and the passing of the last kingship of the High Elves, because Gil-galad was slain. And that, my friends, is the end of the letter. Like I said, it's a very long letter, but we made it through. We made it through in under 2 hours. I'm actually very proud of myself. So that is the letter that precedes the Silmarillion, and that gives you the basic idea of the entire book, both going through the Ainulin Dale, which is the creation myth, and the Valaquenta that precedes the Silmarillion, and then the Silmarillion itself, which covers all of those struggles in the First Age of Middle-earth, primarily focused on elves, but also including the beginnings of men, even though they're not the focus. It's mostly the men who ally themselves with the elves. So we do have those struggles in the First Age, and then following the Quinta Silmarillion, we get the Akalabeth, which is that story of Numenor, the rise and fall of Numenor, and then the Of the Rings in the Third Age, is the final little separate book here in the Silmarillion, and that is talking about the Rings of Power, their prevalence, and ultimately the taking of the One Ring by Isildur. And that is all the stuff that precedes The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. So, in essence, the Silmarillion is everything prior to The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. So this gives you all of the background information that will help lend a lot of depth of knowledge to if you ever reread Lord of the Rings. Things like the Council of Elrond are filled with all these random factoids that make no sense. Like, why do we need to know that the name of Gil-galad's spear is Aeglos? Why include that? But, like, we don't understand or appreciate these characters like Gil-galad because it's not ultimately consequential in the exact plot of Lord of the Rings. But once you have the Silmarillion as a reference, once you have this knowledge, it adds a whole lot more depth and understanding to the world that is then presented in The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. So that's the importance of the Silmarillion, and that is why we are going to read it from start to finish. Alright, just taking a look at chat, seeing what I missed. What's the lifespan of Númenórean men? He basically says it's like 3 times 3. So they have a much higher lifespan. We're talking at least 3 times the normal lifespan. Which is still subjective because, if we look at our own history in the real world, we know that life expectancy was not very high for a while amongst men. I think we topped out at maybe 40, but basically times that by 3. So we could safely say between 150 to maybe 200 years. Maybe. Because you gotta think, when Númenor falls, we are talking about the 13th and 14th, I believe, kings of Númenor. And that spans over the period of, I want to say, 5,000 to 6,000 years. So there's a lot of time there. Or no, that's because it's before the Last Alliance when Númenor falls. So 3,000 years. So 3,000 years. Let's do math. Let's do math! Okay, let me bring up my calculator really quickly. We can do math! Okay, calculator. So, assuming that Elros becomes the first king of Númenor, basically at the end of the First Age, we've got about 3,400 years. And if there are approximately 14 generations, we are talking an average lifespan for the kings of Númenor at 243 years. So, little over 200 years, roundabout, is what you can expect for the older Númenorian race. Now, as their race gets diluted with more human blood, once we are talking about, the surviving kings of Arnor and Gondor, the more they get diluted down with mortal blood, the less that lifespan becomes. So then you end up with Aragorn, who, through the course of The Lord of the Rings, is in his 80s. He's in his 80s. He doesn't look it, but he's in his 80s. And you can expect him to live, I know it says it in the appendices, it says how long he lives, but you could look that information up to be extra sure. But he ends up living for a few more decades into the Fourth Age before he passes away. And then his son, Eldarion, assumes the throne and becomes the next king of Gondor. Did Sauron lose a lot of his power with the fall of the island? Yes. Not fully, because he still had the One Ring. He still had the One Ring. Throughout that entire thing with Númenor, he still had the One Ring. So he was not, he gave himself up willingly, and really the Númenóreans should have known better. They should not, don't be suspicious, don't be suspicious. Super sus, okay? Whenever the big baddie is like, you know what, yeah, you're too powerful, I surrender. No, you don't trust that. Who trusts that? Don't do that. Don't trust the guy. So they make the mistake of trusting him when he surrenders. And basically, over a very short period of time, he goes from prisoner to being the High Council of the Kings of Númenor. Why? Why did they... But he's cunning. Sauron is cunning, and it uses the term, specifically, even Tolkien uses the term seduction. He seduces mortal men. Much like he seduced Celebrimbor in Eregion, who was the elf that he made all of the Rings of Power with. He's a seductive force. He's silver-tongued, and given the opportunity, he will convince you of whatever he wants you to believe. And unfortunately, both the elves, in the case of Celebrimbor, and the Gwaith and Myrdain, which are the elves who are the craftsmen in Eregion, in Ostin Edil, which is the main dwelling of Eregion, they give him the chance. That's their one big mistake, is they give Sauron the chance to become their friend and a counselor. He becomes their mentor in the case of the elves. And this ends up becoming very problematic. But I do like also that Tolkien makes it very clear in this letter that Sauron, his intentions began nobly in the Second Age, where he's like, I'm gonna stay behind, even though I was supposed to go, back to Valinor and be judged like Melkor. I decided I'm gonna stay. And I'm gonna stay to try and fix the mess I made. That ultimately he was trying to make right some of the wrongs that he'd done, which lends a more complex character here. He's not pure evil, and Tolkien says that at the beginning of his letter, that evil is ultimately a result of the fall, the proverbial fall. That evil does not have its root in evil, it has its root in good. It's just a self-righteous predisposition of believing that you know better, and believing that your cause is just. In the case of Melkor, he believes that having this power will make a better, more fulfilling, richer world if he has this ability to create, and that's what he rebels over. And he wins Sauron to his side. They feel justified in making this war and in doing all of these things. And once they're met with nothing but, hatred by their fellows, that, not everyone agrees with them, then they just start getting spiteful. That's when they start going off and being like, anything you make, I'm gonna try to destroy, because screw you. It's spite. So that happens an awful lot, but there is complexity there. Sauron is not just a two-dimensional evil. He, at times, has softer moments where he thinks he's gonna do some good. After all that bad, he thinks he's gonna do some good. But we end up with him falling once again, and then he gets into a power-hungry mode, and again thinks that under his dominion, he's gonna make everything better somehow. But it's really just a selfish lust for power. And the desire to not share that power, much like Gandalf says, there is only one Lord of the Ring, and he does not share power. Which is why Saruman is a fool. Once again, a fool for thinking that he and Sauron are somehow gonna be besties and be on the same level? No. But there you go. That is the opening letter that Tolkien gives at the beginning of the Silmarillion, and it's, I feel like that gives you a great premise. We know now what we are getting ourselves into when we're reading. Yeah, he gave some to you. Yeah, sure. He shares power? Yeah. I mean, he gave the Palantir to Saruman. It's totally fine. It's fine. Funny thing, the Palantir were actually created by Feyenoord. Same as the Silmarils. Same guy. Don't ask me how those, remained in Middle-earth. We know that most of the Seeing Stones are lost, but Saruman gets one. Presumably there's one in Mordor. And, yeah. Feyenoord, no! The ongoing theme, that is absolutely accurate. The ongoing theme of the Silmarillion, it's just Feyenoord, no, Feyenoord, what are you doing? No! Feyenoord, you poor fool. You poor fool.
as the elves would say it. Feyenoord, no! No, Feyenoord! Why? Why are you always like this, Feyenoord? Why? Why must you be this way? Damn it, Feyenoord.
There you go. Teaser of my voice filters. Damn it, Feyenoord. Always making trouble. You just gotta be the greedy one, don't ya? But he's not the only one. He is not the only one. And that's sort of the failing and the frailty of, the elves. The elves want not necessarily individual power, at least not to begin with, but they lust for this desire to enhance themselves and enhance their art so that they can better the world around them. They view it as bettering the world around them. Even Feyenoord, he has that noble intention of trying to make the world a better place. It just goes terribly, terribly wrong, because with power comes the space for corruption. How come Beren's hands got burned by the Silmaril he stole? If I remember correctly, Beren's hand doesn't burn. Morgoth's hands burn. When Morgoth steals the Silmarils, they burn. They burn in his hands, and he never actually fully heals. But if I remember correctly, Beren was deemed worthy, and his hand didn't burn. I could be wrong on that, but that's where my brain is going. So I could be wrong, but I think Beren is like one of the exceptions where he doesn't burn when he takes hold of the Silmaril. Thus, it passes through his line. Thus, it ends up in Eärendil's hands, and he, brings it with him when he's trying to go to Valinor. And it's the reason he actually gets through. Feyenoord, yes. No, Feyenoord, no, Feyenoord. Do you think we'll see Feyenoord and his sons in the Amazon series? I think it's possible in flashback. But, it would be in the context of the time of the two trees. It would be in the context of the creation of the Silmarils, I think. If they show it at all, if they show Feyenoord, it's probably going to be, in a way, giving context to the Second Age. Giving context to the end of the First Age and the War of Wrath, which is the big battle at the end of the First Age. I think that would be the motivation behind showing him at all. Because he doesn't have a huge part to play in the Second Age, and I know that the Tolkien estate has been very, very hesitant to give rights to the First Age to anybody. So if time periods are going to be referenced in the course of the Amazon TV series, I think it's going to be, primarily the Second Age. We already know that. But any flashbacks that happen are probably not going to be in the First Age because they don't have the rights to it. So I think they might be able to make a couple references, but they won't be able to show anything that's firmly placed in the First Age. Which is why the image that we were teased, this one that's behind me on my TikTok, this image shows the two trees of Valinor, which places it in a time period long before the First Age. Because they might have rights to that, but probably not the First Age. So there's going to be this gap of knowledge of an area in which they can play in the Amazon series. Put that on the book jacket? What part? The Feyenoord, no! Feyenoord, no! I'm gonna replace my book into its pretty case here. Isn't that beautiful? I can't get over how beautiful this cover is. The burning of the ships at Loskar. Which we will cover. We will cover. Sentient Silmarils. Oh gosh. Yeah, that's the one thing we're lucky. We're lucky that they aren't sentient. They're not like the Ring. They don't have a sufficient power in them. While they do have power and a draw, they don't have that will to return to the original bearer. The Silmarils are, first and foremost, stones. They're jewels. They don't have that same power that is put into the One Ring. Basically, Feyenoord was not made less when he made the Silmarils, versus Sauron put a lot of his own power into the ring, and thus without the ring, if it's possessed by someone else, his own power was diminished. You still think the Arkenstone is a Silmaril? It's not. It's not, though. All 3 of the Silmarils are accounted for. They are accounted for. One of them is lost in a volcano! Liquid hot magma. I'm like, I even have a sound for that.
How about no?
Nope. How about no? The Arkenstone is not a Silmaril. One's lost in the ocean, from Maglor tossing it into the sea, like we saw in the picture on the front of the book there. The one that Maedhros gets burns his hands, and he tosses it and himself into a raging volcano. That volcano could have died and become the Lonely Mountain. No, it's a completely different area of the Earth. Completely different. I'm like, where are my maps? Where are my maps, darn it? Hold on. I'm like, I have maps. I can do this. Hold up. Give me a moment. I will be right back and I will show you. Like, I can prove this. Hold on a sec. And I'm back. I am back, my friends. Okay, so I have reference materials now. We have the Chinese copy of the Silmarillion, and I chose this one because the map is really easy to find. It's on the back inside cover. So let's take the dust jacket off, which is gorgeous, by the way. I guess you can't see this on TikTok. It doesn't want to pick up. Well, I did make a video on my TikTok about this slip cover. It's just really, really pretty. It's all holographic and gorgeous. But we'll take the slipcover off, and I shall show you. So, back inside cover is Middle Earth. This is the Earth, okay? This is the Earth. This mountain range on the far side here is Ered Luin, okay? This is Beleriand. This is Beleriand. So this is before the end of the first stage, where most of this ends up underwater. So that mountain range, keep that in mind, that this mountain range right here is Ered Luin, okay? Then, if we show you the Lord of the Rings, and this is my 50th anniversary edition of the Lord of the Rings. If we then show you the big map. Don't rip. What the heck? What the hickety heck? Okay. I'm gonna change my scene here so that you guys can see the map better. I'm like, hold up. I can fix it. I'm all determined. I'm like, I'm gonna prove it, darn it. You got me going. Okay. So, I'm gonna show you. If I can. Oh my gosh, this is so difficult in my current position. I'm like, please don't rip the map, Kris. There we go. Okay, so. The mountains right here are Ered Luin. So that was that big mountain range that was all the way on the right-hand side of the other map. It's on the left-hand side because all of that stuff ends up under the ocean. So the volcano was part of Thangorodrim, which was the northern mountains on that continent that goes under the ocean. Under the ocean. Versus Erebor is here. That's a long ways away. It couldn't have then just become Erebor. That's not how this works. Erebor was in existence before, like, it was already there. It didn't just suddenly appear. It was already there. There were dwarves living there during the First Age. We just don't really know much about them because they're not the focus of the story. So no. Nope. The Arkenstone is not a Silmaril. I am sorry to burst your bubble, but that is the truth. It is not. I totally ripped my map. Dang it, this is what happens when I get all passionate. I'm like, well, this book was in mint condition. Not anymore. But yeah, so there's your proof. I know what I'm talking about. Don't cross me. It doesn't mention how far they went after they stole the Silmarils. They didn't pass over into the far east, though. That would have been noted, because anytime anyone else passes into the east, it's noted. Like with Daeron. When Daeron loses his mind because Luthien won't be his and goes with Beren instead, Daeron loses his shit and he wanders. He wanders aimlessly into the far east and is never heard from again, or what have you. You can't convince me. You will never convince me. No, not all of the dwarves are in Moria. So that's a fun thing to talk about. Dwarves have many dwellings, actually, and they do come out in the First Age. But there are the elves of Erebor. They're not elves. There are the dwarves of Erebor. There are dwarves of Khazad-dûm. This shirt and others on sale. On sale now. Link in description. I sell a bunch of team shirts. These are like second age team shirts. They have all the different realms of elves, men, and dwarves. All the main realms. So if you end up watching the TV series and you're like, yay, I'm on this team. I have shirts. I have shirts that are in Elvish for you. There are English versions as well, but the Elvish and Dwarvish ones are way more fun. They're way more fun. But no, there are a lot. Team Akbar. There are a lot of different dwarvish dwellings. So we have Erebor, like I said, in the very, very far east. Change my scene back again. Okay, so we have Erebor in the far, far east, and then we have Khazad-dûm, which ends up being like it is the biggest, most grand dwelling of the dwarves, even in the First Age. But it's just known as a legend. Like the dwarves that live in Nagrod and Bellagost, which are two other dwellings that are in they're in Luthien, the Blue Mountains, which is again that mountain range that seems to be on the eastern side, because it's on the east of Beleriand, but it's actually all the way west in Lord of the Rings, because again that continent falls into the ocean. It gets sunk. There are two dwellings, Nagrod and Bellagost, of the dwarves, and those have a good number of dwarves in them, but they are, if you'll pardon the expression, dwarfed by the size of Khazad-dûm, which is Moria. It's before it becomes Moria, because Moria is just, it's the Dark Land. It's what they end up calling it after it falls. Before it falls, it's just known as Khazad-dûm. I heard an interesting theory once that the Silmarils and all of Valinor was radioactive. Radioactive! I mean, that's an interesting theory. That's an interesting theory. I mean, would Feyenoord have radiation poisoning then? Would Feyenoord be the source of all radiation? Ooh. Do dwarves have multiple kings? Yes. Yes, they do have a lineage. Mm-hmm. Because dwarves don't live forever. They have extended lives, but they are not given the gift of immortality that the elves are gifted by the one god, because the dwarves weren't created by the one god. They were created by one of the lesser gods, one of those angelic beings, the Valar. Aule, who is the craftsman god, he makes the dwarves without permission. And he gets in trouble. He gets in such trouble. And his wife is pissed. His wife, Yavanna, is so angry. Like, how dare you break the rules? You get to break the rules, and you get rewarded by being able to keep these creatures that you've made. And yet here I am following the rules, and I get nothing? No, sir. She gets so angry. They never reconcile completely after that. Aule and Yavanna, even though they are a married couple, basically, amongst these very powerful upper tier god-like creatures, these angels, they never reconcile completely. Aule makes the dwarves and gets away with it. Eru is just like, okay, but they can't come out yet. Like, you made them, I'm not going to destroy them, I'm gonna be nice to you. You didn't do this out of, like, a lust for power, you just really wanted to create something of your own and teach it and be its mentor. Like, I get it. The one god's like, I get it. But no coming out. You can't come out of your little dwarves springing from the ground. They aren't allowed to spring from the ground until the elves first appear. That is the requirement that Eru puts on it. He says, you gotta wait. But Yavanna's angry. Yavanna gets pissed. And that's when she makes the Ents. She makes the Ents out of spite. Yavanna makes the Ents out of spite. Did Melkor hate Varda or desire her? Good question. It's said pretty explicitly that he hates her. But, once again, if we are reading a more three-dimensional, character into these dark characters like Morgoth and Sauron, then perhaps it's possible. It's possible that he could have, that he was jealous. Jealous, and if he could have possessed her, would he have tried? And answer's maybe. If Manwë weren't as powerful as he was, because Manwë was like just below Melkor in power. And if Manwë didn't have the support of all the other gods, which he did, then maybe Melkor would have made a go at her. Maybe. It's possible. He made a go at Sauron, though, and he won. He won Sauron over. So the Silmarils would be the source of radiation, and Fëanor was the first victim of his own creation. I mean, yeah. Though Fëanor gets killed in battle. He doesn't die of radiation poisoning. Though one could say, I guess if you want to theorize, one could say that Fëanor goes a bit mad, that perhaps that's part of the madness. The part of the source of his madness is the radiation. It's a fun theory. End of your rant. No worries. No, I love it. I love it. Were beings of the void created by Eru? Yes? Question mark? It's not explicitly stated. There are creatures that were in existence before the world. So those would be creatures of the void. Tom Bombadil is one of them. He's an enigma. He doesn't really fit into the world that Tolkien then later crafted with the Silmarillion and all of these stories that became the Silmarillion. Tom Bombadil's kind of on the outside of that, and I don't understand why he was put in Lord of the Rings at all. I don't know why. I don't know why Tolkien included him there and even made this an issue. But did Eru create those things in the void? I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I mean, one would assume that being the one god, he is explicitly stated as being the one god, that everything that is in existence does have its source in the one god, as Tolkien wrote it. But could it be outside that? It could. I don't know. I don't know Tolkien's full intent when it comes to the beings in the void. Still have made of wood. I can't see what that icon is. I can't see what that icon is in chat. I apologize. It's too tiny. You wish there was more about Tom Bombadil and Ungoliant. Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. If you like those characters, you don't get a lot of them. I mean, Tom Bombadil does have his own book, right? The whole tale of Tom Bombadil is its own separate little thing. Did any of Morgoth's other generals besides Sauron live to the Second Age? Yes. Yes. Because... I mean, generals, though. I mean, generals, what do you define as a general? Because... you look at any dragons. Dragons and Balrogs. Like Ebrautas says there. Yeah, Balrogs. Those are the Umayar, or the corrupted Maiar, the bad Maiar, if you will. And those would be considered, oh my gosh, my glasses are all askew. Those would be considered generals, I think. And with that in mind, then yes. Whew. I've been on too long, my head is getting all sweaty under my headphones. So if you consider Balrogs and dragons as being generals, then yes, others did survive into the Third Age. Second Age slash Third Age. Because there were beings in the depths of Thangorodrim and Angband. There were beings there, and there were beings in the far east, in, hidey holes that Sauron and Morgoth set up long before, the First Age. There were hidden places of darkness, pockets of darkness, if you will, throughout the land of Middle-earth. So absolutely, Morgoth didn't put all of his eggs in one basket, if you will. He put a lot of his power into Thangorodrim. It's what he focused on. But he did have other realms that were set up before the First Age. So one assumes that he would have left a general in each, like a dragon or one of the Balrogs, or someone like Sauron, not as powerful or as, in line with Morgoth's purpose, but still evil. Evil is his one and only name. Hints of the cosmic horror that Tolkien makes. Yeah. If he was aware of weird fiction, I'm not sure. When did weird fiction start? I mean, Tolkien was aware of a lot of fiction. He was a classicist, like he enjoyed the classics. He translated several classics. So, yeah, especially Old English stuff, he had a very good knowledge of that. So I don't know if he would have known about weird fiction or not, but it's certainly plausible. Who do the ones under Middle-earth serve? Still Morgoth. Ultimately, Morgoth. Yeah. And when Morgoth is gone, Sauron, by extension. And when Sauron is gone, they become listless. Leaderless, ultimately. And that makes sense, because when you look at the power and the prestige of both Morgoth and Sauron, no one comes even close. None of the other, we get these weird... especially in the Hobbit movies, and I roll my eyes because the Hobbit movies are like bad fan fiction. They're like bad fan fiction. Which ultimately, can they be entertaining and can you enjoy them? Absolutely. It's like guilty pleasures. But are they canonical? Barely at all. The vast majority of the stuff that made it into the Hobbit movies is not in Tolkien's world at all. So we see these bad guys that are raised up into like these seeming positions of power and greatness, but even if they were generals, they didn't even come close to Sauron. Nobody did. So once both of them are gone and either destroyed, made completely like shadows, shades of themselves where they have absolutely no power in the physical realm, or exiled into the void and executed, depending on which take on the Silmarillion you have. Looking at different versions in the history of Middle-earth, in some versions, Melkor is just chained out in the void and left. He's left there, and that's his punishment. To slowly go mad, one assumes. And in another version, he's taken out there and executed. Like, he's actually put to death because they bind him in a physical form and then destroy it. But I feel like that's a bit of a cop-out, because the Ainur can't be fully destroyed. They can make them into formless shades, like Sauron is reduced to once the One Ring is destroyed. But you can't just put Melkor to death. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. I feel like I'm going to say that an awful lot. Weird fiction is typically seen as starting around the 1920s, but it's seen as lowbrow. Oh, okay. That's fair. Was Tolkien aware of it? I don't know. It might not have been on his radar. Tolkien, I mean, if it wasn't the classics, he was relatively, and this is not saying negatively, but he was a bit self-absorbed. Like, he was too busy building his own world, I think, to pay a lot of attention to other people's worlds in what was considered contemporary fiction back then. I don't think he was paying that close of attention to other authors and what they were putting out during that time period, from like the 20s to the 50s. Modern New Weird is incredible. Give me some suggestions. I'll write some down. I don't guarantee that I'll read them because I'm a terribly slow reader, so I'm really bad at reading suggested books. Tell Hannah Bob. Hannah Bob is the bibliophile in the group. So let's say, go on one of her videos and be like, hey, Wizard Way Kris was talking about, modern new weird fiction. I suggest this book. Oh yeah, I love the lore behind the Silmarillion. That's what makes it gives a lot of depth to Tolkien's world, and that's what I love most. Melkor is his fair name, Morgoth is his dark name. That's fair. Close enough. Morgoth is the name that is given to Melkor by the elves. Much like Sauron's original name is Mairon, and we see that in the Silmarillion. Mairon is Sauron's original name. His given name is Mairon, which means impressive. He's the impressive one. He was one of the Ainur under Aule's direction. Aule, the guy who created the dwarves and got in trouble. That guy. So Sauron was one of the craftsmen. He was one of the greatest craftsmen amongst the Ainur. And he was obsessed with perfection. He wanted greater efficiency, greater perfection, and would pursue it single-mindedly. It's part of what separated him a bit from the other Ainur. And that's why he became such a powerful ally of Morgoth. When Melkor seduced Mairon to his side, that's a big win for Melkor. Milkor. No, not milk. Milk. No. Melkor. But yes, Morgoth in essence is his dark name. It means dark foe. In Sindarin, it means dark foe. Sauron means abominable. And then Sauron's other name from the elves is Gorthaur, which I would have to double check its meaning. I can do that very quickly. Let's just bring it up. Let's bring up the internet, because I'm blanking. I think it means like Dark Lord. I think it means Dark Lord, but I could be wrong. So okay, etymology: Gorthaur, dread or abhorred. Gore is fear or dread, and Thaur is abominable or abhorrent. So, the feared, abominable snowman. Gorthaur. But that's part of the wonderful thing, is that Tolkien created these languages, and almost all of the names have their roots in either Quenya or Sindarin. And I have a pretty fair knowledge of Sindarin, not so much with Quenya, but with Sindarin, I can typically pick apart names. I can typically pick them apart to tell you what they actually mean. And as I read the Silmarillion, that's one of my goals. As I read it for you guys, I want to have little things that pop up on my screen, over on my Twitch channel. I will have things that pop up on the screen here and share names and their basic etymology, what they mean, so that hopefully they will sound more descriptive to you as you read, and you'll be better able to remember them as we go along, because there are a lot of names, okay? There's an obscene amount of names dropped in the Silmarillion, so I'm going to try to keep them organized for everybody so that you can better follow along with them. Is it true that the hobbits Merry and Pippin are based off his fallen friends in World War I? I don't know. I will easily say I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. They very well could be, but I have no idea. It could be in the letters, which I haven't read at length. I've read a lot of Tolkien, but I have not read the letters all the way through. Love the idea of adorable twink Sauron being called abominable. Yeah. Oh man, I'm really looking forward. I'm really looking forward to seeing Sauron in the Amazon series. They better make him hot, because he canonically is a fair and seductive. Those are terms that are assigned to Sauron. Fair and seductive. If Tolkien himself calls him that, they better deliver. It's my one demand. Make Sauron hot. And please give him that seductive, magnetic quality, and make him pansexual, for the love of God. Make him pan, please. Have him trying to basically seduce everyone. Beefcake, not a twink. Well, I mean, he's in the forge, right? Like, he's a smith. More than anything, Sauron is a smith. And he was from the very beginning of his existence. He is a creator of things. He likes to make stuff. And once he takes physical form, he does that literally. So, yeah. He would have some muscle to him, even if they make him relatively slender like the elves, because most of the Ainur, when they take physical form in Middle-earth, they form themselves after the shape of the elves, to make themselves more relatable. They didn't want to look too scary. They wanted to win the elves over. Can't start a Melkor cult if you ain't cute. Precisely, that's it. That's absolutely it. Student of Valet, absolutely. Yeah, the best student of Valet, I would argue. I mean, there's a reason his name literally means impressive. He was literally created to be an impressive smith. To be a formidable, I use the word creation loosely because No one has the true creation powers that the one god has in Tolkien's world. But that level down from that, where you're able to make and remake, Sauron by his very nature was meant to be one of the greatest makers in that world. And that's really cool. That's really cool. Celeborn is the twink. I mean, I wouldn't consider Celeborn. I think Haldir is more of a twink if we're going by the actors who were actually playing them in Lord of the Rings. Celeborn's not a twink. Though Celeborn would have to have a very steady and calm personality to get along with Galadriel. Let's put it that way. Because, ooh, girl. She's got enough fire for, like, 3 elves. She's got enough get up and go for too many elves. She has way too much ambition. And you would have to have a male partner who'd be absolutely okay being a partner, but not being the spotlight. So I see Celeborn as not necessarily having a submissive personality type, but that's as close of a word as I can come to, off the top of my head. He would have to follow Galadriel's lead, so he would have to be submissive to her. She's the one who's driving that relationship. She is the driving force of that relationship. And that's okay. Doesn't make Celeborn any less. He's still a great elf. He's a prince among his people, but Galadriel is running that show, for sure. Her ambition rules, and he lets it. Sauron gives top energy in the Celeborn relationship. You mean Celebrimbor? I think you mean Celebrimbor, not Celeborn. Galadriel is Fëanor's half-cousin. Half-niece? Half-niece? Half-niece, technically. Because Fëanor's half-brother is Finarfin, and this is the daughter of Finarfin. So Galadriel is Fëanor's half-niece. Half-niece. Yeah. New Better's got it. Thanks for being here, New Better. I love your content. Man, I love your content. If anybody's watching this, and if you don't happen to be over on my TikTok feed, please look up New Better Do Better. He is also available here on Twitch. He does full-on Tolkien classes, bruh. This guy knows what he is talking about, and I love it. Win for the diversity crowd, hell yeah. So please, check out... Do I have a shout-out function here on Twitch? I should. I don't have a bot set up yet. That's my one true failing here. I don't have a bot set up on Twitch yet. I gotta work on that. I have this great layout, but I don't have a bot. So, shout out New Better Do Better. Everybody go and give him a follow, please. Follow. Turn on those notifications so you see when he goes live, because this guy will share so much information with you. It's gonna be so good. That Galadriel learns from her mistakes and mellows out. I would argue she doesn't. I don't think Galadriel has any chill. Honestly, I don't. Like, she puts on this air of being like this cool, untouchable kind of creature, but she has major fire in her, and that comes out in that scene that we see in Lord of the Rings. You know, instead of a Dark Lord, you'll have a queen. Like, she is corruptible. Honestly, the worst person who could have gotten the One Ring in the Third Age, Galadriel. Hands down. Hands down. She would have tried to completely topple Sauron, given the power. And we just saw in the letter that we read, Tolkien made it so that if the ring were given to someone with enough power and ambition, things that Galadriel has in spades, that person could have contested the will of Sauron and subjugated him. She would have become the new Dark Lord. Like, she could have made it happen. She really could have made it happen. Absolutely, 100%. She would have been the most dangerous force with the One Ring. Which is why we're like, don't give her the ring, Frodo, don't give her the ring. Don't do it. Hey, love you too, Nubetta. I love that most of the issues in the Silm could have been solved with polyamory. Yeah, I mean, that's fair. That's fair. That's fair. Mm-hmm. Though not all relationship problems, because you have a situation like Miriel. I think her name was Miriel. The first wife of Finwë. I believe she was Miriel. It's Feanor's mom. When she created Feanor, she put so much of her spirit into Feanor that she herself faded, almost out of existence. Which was dumb. But in any case, that's what happened, and so when she fades, Finwë mourns her as if she has completely died, and then remarries. Now, if he had already had a polyamorous relationship with Indis, would that have made the bearing of Feyenoord easier? I don't know. Would it have still happened? Probably. So poly doesn't fix everything, but it doesn't hurt. It would have helped with the Luthien Beren Dairon thing. Poor Dairon. Dairon gets, the short end of that stick. Poor Dairon. But that's why Dairon is one of my favorite characters to use in fanfiction. I loved playing with Dairon and what happened when he passed out of knowledge into the east. Basically, he ends up in Greenwood, right? We just don't know if he ever comes amongst the elves again. In my head, he does, but there's no canonical evidence for that. Do I think the Amazon series will play with Sauron a bit? Do I think that we will see a conflicted Sauron trying to do good or full-blown evil manipulative Sauron? I'm hoping for the former. I'm hoping wholeheartedly for the former. I want them to give depth to the bad guy, because especially if you expect this series to last 5 seasons, there has to be some complexity there. It can't just be and there's one big evil baddie who is evil he's just evil for the sake of being evil. You can't sustain a series off of that. But if you have, a bad guy who thinks he's doing good and can give you arguments for why he's right, if he can convince, kings amongst men, why would he not convince the audience? Why would he not convince the audience? So I hope that we see a really complex Sauron. I hope we see a Sauron who hesitates, who has a moment when he is, sort of the god amongst the elves, when he has that moment where he has this power and he, presumably falls into some sort of kinship or relationship with Celebrimbor. If he hesitates, it would make him so much more relatable. He knows what the fate of Middle-earth is. He knows ultimately that he is supposed to be the bad guy. But to struggle with that role would make him a great bad guy. To struggle with that role and to want to set it aside in order to have peace and happiness for once. If he feels like that's within his grasp with Celebrimbor, that gives him a lot more depth. And it makes the loss of Celebrimbor, it makes him turn into a darker character, that without the one person that he could have seen himself being happy with, without that, he turns even darker. Which then makes sense that he then becomes, that guy. He becomes that guy who then ends up, creating a dark cult and being that much more ruthless in the second, the later second and into the Third Age. Because he's lost something. He's lost something that he will never get back. And just showing that betrayal of Celebrimbor costs him. It costs him. That's what I hope to see. Because that adds so much more depth and purpose behind his going amongst the elves. And it gives credence to the whole, he started with fair intentions. He started with fair intentions, and they went nefarious. I'd love that. Yeah, Galadriel does have motives of revenge for sure. Sauron killed her brother. She hates him, to put it lightly. Yeah, that's totally fair. Yeah. Sauron and yeah, I mean, Finrod Felagund, you're absolutely right. Finrod gets killed by Sauron, specifically by Sauron, so pretty sure she's not too thrilled about that. And I love that duel between Finrod and Sauron. That's a great one. He may still be wondering, yeah, I did a video about that, about Daeron, and how, like, he could still be out there. Same thing with Maglor. In some versions, Maglor throws himself into the sea with the Silmaril, but in most cases, it shows him throwing the Silmaril into the sea and then wandering along the shores for the rest of his existence. But the shoreline changes because eventually all of Beleriand ends up under the ocean. So does Maglor move with the shore, or is he just lost in the ocean? We don't know. With that unanswered, I love the idea of the two greatest bards in existence are still there. They're just very solitary figures. Maybe eventually they come back together. That's honestly the source of, like, the majority of my fanfiction between them. Right. Exactly, Nubeta. With the, Sauron repents, but then falls back into his own habits, being scared of the Valar. Finrod gets no justice. He doesn't get enough love. I absolutely agree. Finrod was a great elf. And when he would wander and he befriends, the green elves in Osiriand who really want nothing to do with anyone, but they welcome him. And he comes back and he learns Sindarin before most of the other elves do, because he goes amongst the Sindar. He goes amongst the Nandor. And he learns from them and then teaches them. He's very open with his knowledge. He's open to all the other cultures. He makes himself known to the dwarves. With the dwarves, he builds Nargothrond. Like, what a great elf. He has such a wonderful, positive influence on everyone around him. What a great elf. I love Finrod. And you're right, he just does not get enough praise. He does not get enough credit. You want an AU where that happens. Did she actually die? She being who? Remind me who you're talking about, and I'll happily answer. If you're talking Galadriel, Galadriel does not die. Galadriel never dies. She's one of few elves that lives from, the time of the two trees all the way through the First Age, Second Age, Third Age, and then sails to Valinor. She never dies. One of the few to never pass through the halls of Mandos. It's pretty cool. Yes, Finrod, like all elves, does get brought back. All elves, and that's also explained in the letter we just read, all elves are immortal. Even if they are slain, they are brought back. They don't pass from the world. They exist as long as the world exists. That's their gift/curse. Right. Nubeta is saying that Finrod's the only elf who's loved by all races and kingdoms. He is universally loved. He is a beloved guy. He would be everyone's friend. He is absolutely a bro. He would be everyone's friend. I agree. I love it. Oh my goodness, it is 1 p.m. We have been live for about 3 hours now, I think. Which probably means it is time. Yeah, we're like 10 minutes shy of having been live for 3 hours. Fun times, though. So, any other parting questions? We have finished the opening bits of the Silmarillion, and we will start on the Ainulin Dale next week. Looking forward to it. And I will do my best. I will do my utmost to give you guys correct pronunciation. It's kind of my thing, because I'm the Elvish person. But even I screw up my speech every so often. I struggle to say Nargothrond instead of Nargothrond, because Nargothrond rolls off my tongue a lot easier. But it's incorrect. It's Nargothrond. The goth part. The goth part. The goth part is the emphasized part. Oh, thank you so much, Nubetta. This is new to me. I have never read aloud in my life, so this is totally new. I like to think I'm relatively eloquent, so we'll give it a go. I'll have to edit this down a little bit and put the reading portion up on YouTube so that people can enjoy it, hopefully. Hey, thank you so much. Thank you, Lostario Perevel. I appreciate you guys for tuning in for so long. But we will start on the Ainulindale next weekend. I'm going to make this a regular thing on Saturdays because my dad is typically out of the house for the early morning. So that gives me a little bit of... I can concentrate and not worry about disturbing him. Because I do live with my father at the moment. Yay, pandemic! It ends up being positive for both me and him, I think. Oh, you tagged me in a post. Okay. Stitch, you'd love to hear my answer. Absolutely, will do. I'll do that as soon as we sign off here. All right, thanks guys. I appreciate you all being here. Thank you so much for joining me over on Twitch. I appreciate all you guys for sticking with me. We will be back next week with more Silmarillion goodness. We will start on the Ainulindale, and then if we get through that very quickly, which it might take a bit because there are a lot of names to cover, if we get through that, we'll move on to the Valaquinta, but the Valaquinta will probably be its own separate live stream. So I hope you guys all take care. Thank you for joining me over on my Twitch channel, and I'm gonna send you guys off now. So thank you, everybody. I will see you guys next week.